Hi, hey, hello there. Hi, hey, folks. So this is the PSPowerHour, and we're going to do a bunch of PowerShell community lightning talks. I'm really not going to take up too much time, so presumably here, because you want to listen to the content. Let me just introduce our first speaker today. Joel, take it away.
Thank you, guys. So yeah, hopefully you can see my screen. Fingers crossed. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about today about something that is a little less known, but is really handy in PowerShell. It can really help you simplify your functions. We're going to talk a little bit about argument transformation attributes, which are a little buried, but they're really handy to work with. Let's dive right into a quick example. So let's say, for example, you have a really basic function where you're just looking to get the length of a file, right? To do that, most people would just call get item on something, get the path, and if you're going to do a wrapper function like this, you're going to have to take the path in as a string value, which is fine, and it works really well a lot of the time. Unfortunately, it's not the best because you have to also call another commandlet in between, and that kind of quote-unquote boilerplate has to go into your function, which it doesn't necessarily need to. Just as a quick example, this, if I go ahead and execute this, I get the length path. Perfect. It works. It's simple for now. But once you get to a bit of a bigger function, doing some more complicated stuff or taking some different kinds of input, it can be really quite tricky to work with. And if we go down a little bit, there's one way to go with this specific kind of scenario here, where you can just take in and you can type your parameter with like a file info. This has pros and cons as well, but it does effectively the same thing. Oh, wait. No, it doesn't. What happened there? This is different. We had 1,247, and then I did it again. I got 5,210. It's literally finding a different file. And that's actually because of a point I made down here where it will only properly handle the path when you type it like this if you're using a full path. If you use a partial path, it actually looks in a different current directory because of how the .NET types work versus how the PowerShell subsystems actually work with the path. So yeah, it's a little bit tricky, and you have to be very careful to actually only accept full names, or you have to do some kind of funky conversion, make sure you're getting your full name. But once you do this in like a parameter block, you're kind of stuck. You need to make sure you're getting a full name, which is not easy to do in this kind of setup. But if you did, for example, instead, you actually went and got your full name here, you would then get the correct result. So this does work. It just doesn't work how you might initially expect. And there are a few types in .NET which are a little bit like this. You just like, some things come with caveats. PowerShell does its best to do, its own argument transformations automatically. It has a lot of conversion paths preset so that you can just not have to worry about how I'm going to convert this value, which is great. But as I mentioned down here, there's a few limitations with this specific one. For example, we lose the flexibility of get item where we can just be like get item and it picks from the current directory. We also lose the ability to even handle folders at all. Like it won't even find folders because it's a file info. It'll usually reject those completely. It's like, oh, this is a folder. Nah. And it'll usually give you an error from memory at least. And then also folders don't even have a link. So we don't care about that here. But if we did want to handle both, it's more complicated. So you have some trade-offs here. If you want to like eliminate those, we have to get a little more advanced here, and that's really where the parameter transformation attributes come in. This is kind of what a basic one looks like. Okay, I've got a using namespace statement here because system management automation is too much to type out several times. Not worth it. Just use a using statement. It's so much easier. And so I've given this rather a long name. Sneaky thing with attributes is, for those of you not familiar with C#, you can actually cut off the attribute when you're actually using it. See down here, I've actually got the type name here, but I'm missing the attribute section up here, which is just how C# kind of works, and PowerShell picks that up as well. So this has to inherit this specific type. This is a type in your system management automation namespace, and it is the base type for any kind of transformation attributes you want to make. So it's got to inherit that, and it must implement this particular method, which is a transform method. It must return a generic object. And it has to take two parameters. One of them is engine intrinsics. This is kind of like a metadata sort of thing. It will tell you the surrounding context where this is happening. I'm not going to get too into this. You can explore it if you like. It's great fun to dig into. I haven't found a great deal of utility in it, but it's pretty fun to dig into if you just want to look to see what's in there. And it also has to take a generic object as input. This is the item that you're going to get passed to your parameter. Currently, it's just throwing a not implemented exception, so it's going to give us nothing. And actually, because of that, if we actually try and call this function, it will just error out completely. It'll just fail, saying this hasn't been implemented. We're giving up. And this is a particular thing. PowerShell actually gives you a lot of control over these, in that if you deliberately throw out of this particular transform method when it's on your parameter down here as the attribute, PowerShell will completely fail to do any kind of parameter conversion of its own. There's something you need to do that I'll show you in a minute, which actually, lets it follow its own conversion path afterwards if you don't want to handle it in this specific thing. So what I'm going to do here, the way I like to handle it personally is I like to use a switch statement for two reasons. One is it makes everything nice and tidy, easy to work with. The other is that this little object item up here, it's an object, but there's no guarantee that it's a singular object. It can be an array. So if we handle this with a switch, we actually automatically get it. We actually automatically get things handled by the switch, because switches in PowerShell automatically enumerate whatever you're passing into it. So this makes it easier. So let's say, for example, we're looking for a path. Well, let's go ahead and say, well, we want to be able to handle string, right? So if it's a string object, awesome, let's handle that. So what will we do here? This is where we kind of put our boilerplate back in, but it keeps it in a place outside of our function, so we can reuse it if we need to. So for example, we would just literally do, okay, we're gonna do get item here, and we're gonna say that's probably the path if it's a string value in this particular context. That's what makes the most sense. We've called our parameter path. That's what it's really gonna be. And I'm actually going to assign this over here because we can't just directly output from a class method. So I'm gonna store the output here, and we're gonna return it once we're done. So we're gonna return output. And what that'll do is once we've processed it, basically, we're going to capture it into output, and we're going to return it back for PowerShell to see. Now, honestly, this one is going to be pretty simplistic. So if it's a string, we're going to do that. If this is actually already a, let's say, system IO file info is actually what's the backing type for the stuff you get back from get child item, stuff like that. So if it's a file info object, we're just going to send it directly back. We don't even mind. That's exactly what we're kind of looking for here. So that's kind of what get item will get us back. That's what we'll get back from this. And if, for example, we wanted to say, okay, you can put directories in here, but we want to give it like a really clear error. So we can actually put custom errors in here. So if we get a directory info instead, we can be like, that's not very helpful. We want to find the length of something here. Directories are completely useless for this. So instead, well, actually, we have two options. We could just error out like this. We could just put throw. Let's use, there is a specific exception type you can use here, and it's quite a long one. Argument transformation metadata exception. It's long, I know, but it's the name the PowerShell guys decided to go with, so we're going to work with that. It's kind of like the natural exception type here that the parameter binder expects you to throw if that's a really big issue. Like if you give it something that it should not be trying to handle, you throw this exception that goes, okay, we're not going to deal with that. Not worth it. And we'll just give it a simple message. And what we'll actually do then, we'll also add a default case to this switch. So if we don't get anything that we're expecting, if we get something weird, maybe PowerShell can kind of handle it. So what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and return that object back. So if we get some weird input, PowerShell will go, okay, we're going to go through this method. Oh, we just got it back. And what actually happens once this output gets back to PowerShell's parameter binder, once it gets through this attribute, it'll actually go ahead and then try and cast it to this. So if we throw it back, so if we throw the get item output into there, it'll be like, okay, same type, perfect. That's our parameter value. If we throw this file info in there, same thing. It's exactly what we're after. And actually, this type is a little different. This is file system info. This is
about a minute warning.
Okay, it's the parent type for file info and directory info. And yeah, so it will just kind of pull it all together, and both will work in this basically, even though we're not really handling both. But yeah, so then we can get the length here, it's all done. But if we give it something that it doesn't really want to work with, or that we don't want to directly have to bother with, we just go, okay, PowerShell, take this back, and it will attempt to use its own normal conversion path here. If we wanted to actually disable that, you can also throw out of the default case, and that will basically disable any conversions in the parameter binder that you haven't set. So you can have a lot of customizability. You can be like, I want to take these 3 specific types, like, hey, I want to take string, I want to take the files, and I want to take directories and nothing else. And you could put a throw statement in here to throw an error, and if anything else goes in there, it instantly errors out. Now, that's not the best thing to do, I think. I think having a PowerShell to have that flexibility is a really good idea, because that way, if some new type comes along that you're not aware of, it can just kind of try and handle it through whatever conversion paths are available, which is great. And I had a third example here that we're probably not going to get to really, but yeah, so this then would work once this is all in. I got a quick demonstration if I can highlight all this properly.
About 10 seconds.
Go. Okay, there you go, and I got it right there. So I didn't have to put anything special in here apart from the attribute. That's all it is. Yeah. I have a third example I'll put on the GitHub when we're done here, but yeah, thank you guys. You guys have a good one.
Thanks, Joel. Joshua, you want to do a quick mic test?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Perfect. You want to go last still?
I'm easy. I'm ready to go.
Okay, cool.
Already shared. Let's do this.
All right. Well, in that case, I'm trying to cram a lot into this, so I've toned down my about slide. I'm Josh King. You can find me on Twitter at WindowsNZ. And there's going to be links and repos and all sorts. You'll be able to find them on the PSPowerHour repo after this. So I'm trying to get a pre-existing module that includes some existing pest tests wired up into Azure DevOps pipelines, and try and do that within the 10 minutes I've got here. So I've already got a module here ready to go. It has pest tests written. The actual content of the module isn't all that important, except it's got 2 public functions and 2 private functions, and we're going to look at building those into a compiled PSM1 file and releasing it to the gallery and GitHub. So I've already written a build script while that's chugging away down the bottom there, thinking about things. Actually, I haven't even got PowerShell running. Cool. So my build script has 2 phases, test and compile. Compile is just going to grab all of my PS1 files and chuck them into a PSM1 and export the public members. And again, you'll be able to see all this later, so I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I've also got test, which literally just installs Pester if it's missing, and exports the format in a format, exports the results in a format that Azure DevOps can handle. We've also got release. This handles publishing to the PowerShell gallery, just because I want to write that myself rather than using the extension that's already in there. And I have an example here of setting a release variable via a task. So that's the module itself. It is already on GitHub, and I'm going to go and add Azure DevOps to this repo. So you do that via the GitHub Marketplace, search for Azure. There's only 2 things, so I want pipelines. And I want to configure access. So I've already set it up. It's all on previous, rather on other repos. So my setup process isn't exactly the same. But I do need to add repository access for this, and that's my AZ SpeedOps module. So I'll select it there, it's added to the list, and I'll click Save. And what this is going to do is take me over to Azure DevOps automatically. And I'm going to need to sign into my account because I've got all of them. Select an organization, I've already got one of those, and I need a project. So I don't already have a project, I'll create a new one. We'll call this AZ SpeedOps. So it's specific for this module, and I'm going to make this public so that I can share the link later. How am I going for time, Warren? Or Michael?
Got about 6 minutes, 6.5 minutes.
Oh, good.
Go, go, go.
Yeah. So select my repository. This is going to go off and find if there's any existing YAML files in there. There isn't, so I'm just going to choose a starter one. And I'm not actually going to bother editing this yet, except to get rid of the comments. And I'm going to click save, because when I go back in and edit this again, or edit this again, there's going to be a little helper blade that pops out, which helps speed things up a bit. So once this churns away, it's actually committing directly to my GitHub repo at the moment. I wonder if that's already going to have come through. Yes, so it's added this Azure pipelines.yaml file, and it's going to go and try and run the build right away, which I don't want. So I head back to builds, click edit. It's loading up the editor, and you see this tasks blade on the right, which helps build this thing out. So the first thing is I want to specify my VM image. It defaults to Ubuntu, and I don't want that. There is a Windows 2019 image that comes standard with PowerShell already installed on it, so I don't need to worry about that. My first step is I can just search for them and find them over here as I need PowerShell. I'm going to run an inline script because that's how I got this all working. And I'm going to reference my build.ps1 file, and I'm going to tell it test. And that's literally all I need to do for my first PowerShell script, except that I might want to add a display name. And I'd normally be a little bit more verbose, but I don't have time. Right, now I want a second PowerShell task. So that's going to run my pester tests against my individual PS1 files. And then I'll run my compile step. And I'm not going to bother giving it a name because it'll take too long. So that's going to compile my big PSM1 file. And then I'm going to want to, actually, let's do it like this because it's quicker. Run my pester tests again against the PSM1. So this is just a display name. There's logic inside the pester tests to know which version of the script, the module to test. Then I need to publish my test results. Publish test. I happen to know that I am using in unit format, and this isn't going to be right because I have it as test results.xml. So the rest is all fine. Now this is all coming out of my pester tests. It's in the actual build script that I specify the XML and the output type. And finally, I want to publish my pipeline artifacts. And it would help if I can spell. So this just bundles up the artifacts from the build and lets me grab them in a later step. So I'm just grabbing the entire module because I'm going to need all sorts of bits, and I don't have time to be selective about it. So that's my build pipeline done, and that should go off and start running in a second. While that's happening, let's go and start a release pipeline, hopefully. So I want a new pipeline. I'm not going to bother naming things nicely because I don't have time. I want an empty job. Stage 1, sure. I need to add an artifact.
How about a 2-minute warning?
Oh, no. So I'm just selecting which build, and basically I'm saying the latest. So let's go into task. Let's pop our head over here, see if this thing's working. Oh no, my build failed. What did I do wrong? Oh, of course. Why do I always do that? That's the problem with going by the name Windows, is I keep forgetting the W. Windows 2019. Save. Dear. All right. Download pipe. Download pipeline artifact. Add that artifact name AZ. And I'm going to copy and paste this bit because I have it on my other screen and I don't have time to type it. Actually, wrong version. I want the old one. Done. Right, I need PowerShell. And I have a feeling we're not going to get to see this released, but I'll keep working on it and tweet out a link later, because this is now running, and I'll keep going here. Sorry, I'm jumping all over the show. I know this is was a little bit ambitious to get it all done, but
About 30 seconds.
oh no. I might at least be able to show the finished build. So let's just watch the build. So it's checked out the code from GitHub, then it goes off and runs the pest tests. So that includes updating the version and running the test. It all succeeds, hopefully, and then goes off, compiles the module, runs the test again, all going well, it succeeds, and then it publishes my build artifacts. So when that starts all finishing, you do get a nice view of all your successful pest tests, and you can go and check out your artifacts. And the difference here from GitHub is going to be that I now have this compiled module here, which is literally just my README, PSD, and PSM1 file. So I imagine that's probably fine.
All right, next up, Jason.
Hey, Al. So I don't know about you, but I don't like building out a whole lot of things across the whole farm of servers when I don't have to. So I wrote this. Got here a script that will actually build out websites across a farm with some required information that you're going to need to provide and some environment information that it will get from the computer that you're running it on. So we're going to need to give this thing a friendly ID for the website. We're actually going to need the domain name because that's kind of important. And we break things up in load balanced areas. So we, pod 1, pod 2, pod 3, pod 4, whatever. So that's kind of a required field. So we know which servers to target and install the things on. In the beginning of this, we're getting our environmental variables. So, less typing in the script. So it's going to pull the first 3 letters of the machine that you're running it on, which you're assuming you're running it in the same namespace as your web servers. It's also going to
text a tiny bit.
Say again?
Can you just zoom in a tiny bit?
I can try. If I knew how to.
Control plus.
Thank you. There we go. That better?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Cool. All right. So, like I said, we're getting the first 3 letters of your computer name that you're running it from. We're also going to grab just the straight name because we're going to be using that as our source for our default framework. Then we're going to build out the array of servers. So you can have this up to, however many you need, and then just store it into your variable. We're also going to run out and get and make sure that you have the certificate installed for the domain that you're building. That's kind of an important thing to do if you're going to be building websites. If you don't have it, if you do have that, then we're going to go ahead and copy out the source over to the destination inside of your client's areas where you host your websites, or it's going to throw an error and tell you to go check which server didn't have the certificate installed on. So once you have all your environment done, we're going to go ahead and we're going to invoke a whole bunch of stuff to build out the website. So we're going to build the website with the friendly name. We're going to bind it to port 443. We're going to set that physical path as the file, the folder that got copied. We're going to tell it that it's using SSL. We're going to make sure that it has SNI enabled and that the host header is the domain name. We're also going to build an app pool with that specific name, with the friendly name. We're going to set the application pool to be associated with that website. We don't need the ASPX handlers, so I go ahead and remove those. I left that in here because people might want to know how to take those things out, because who needs ASPX, right? So it's going to go ahead and build that out on every single server in the farm. And then once it's done with that, it's going to reach out and then it's going to bind your certificate for you. So it's going to go get the web binding with the friendly name, and then it's going to add the SSL certificate on port 443, so you can have multiple individual certificates bound on port 443 for individual sites. And that's pretty much it for me. I know I kind of blazed through that, but this is the bit that I actually really wanted to show off because this took me a while to figure out.
No, it's totally okay to end early. In that case, we'll go ahead and flip over to Brandon. Thanks so much, Jason.
Awesome. So hopefully y'all can see my screen. My name is Brandon Olin. I am a SRE at Stack Overflow, and here's a bunch of links that of this latest project that I'm going to show you today called Terminal Icons. And what Terminal Icons is a fairly simple, or actually a really simple PowerShell module that really just adds some eye candy into your console. Basically, what it does is it depending on if you're viewing folders or files, it will insert custom icons and or colors to view those in your terminal. And here's a little screenshot of what it looks like. The way this works is that it's kind of leveraging most of the hard work done by a project called Nerd Fonts. And if you don't know what Nerd Fonts is, it is essentially a set of custom patched fonts with a bunch of extra glyphs or icons added into the font library, which you can address via the Unicode code point. So what this allows you to do is instead of having a type in a letter A, it allows you to show the symbol for Apple or for PowerShell or for a database or whatnot. And what this project does is it basically takes a whole bunch of custom icons from these various projects and creates a single condensed font library using a number of popular fonts such as Source Code Pro, Hack, Fire Code, etc. And what you can do is you can download these fonts and install them and set them up in VS Code or your terminal of choice. And then what terminal icons will do is show those for you. So let's go ahead and see what this does. See, let me make sure I'm in the right folder here. This is just some presenter stuff. So what I'm going to show you is actually a terminal icons is published to the gallery, but I noticed a bug about an hour ago. So I'm not going to show you that version. I'm going to show you one that I've just edited, but I've not released yet. So let me show you the default output that we all know from PowerShell about listing folders and icons is right here. I'm going to go ahead and import the terminal icons module. And then we'll do another directory listing. And you can see terminal icons has decorated this output with some custom fonts and colors. And what it does is it basically looks at a theme file that has been defined to inspect and say, okay, is this a folder? Yes. Is it a folder called .git? Okay, we'll put this icon on there. Is it a folder called .vscode? We'll use this icon, this color, etc. And it's basically just a lookup table of well-known folder names and then also well-known files or extensions. And it will display custom icons and colors based on if it has a file or folder that matches an entry in the theme. And we can look at a couple commands that this module has right here. I should also actually back up and say that the way that this works is essentially it's leveraging custom format files in PowerShell. And if you don't know what these are files that you can leverage that will display output differently depending on what type PowerShell is working with. And in this case, I am doing a custom format file that will list objects of type directory info or file info differently. And the way that I do that is I have it calling right here a custom a function to format that display at that output and return it back to PowerShell. Let's look at some of the commands you can do with this.
Just
So
FYI, we can't really see the left-hand side, and the right-hand side is a little
Okay.
pixelated. I think because it's so wide.
that's okay. The left-hand side is not that big a deal. So let's do get terminal icons theme. So here's I can list my current theme. My color theme is called Dev Black Ops, and my icon theme is also called Dev Black Ops. This theme information is stored in your profile in this directory. And this is really so you can upload your own custom themes. And when you import PowerShell or you import terminal icons again, it will load up that current theme that you've set. That maybe it's a theme that you didn't ship with the module itself. Let's also list, so I can list the terminal icon or the color themes that ship with the module, and it's really just one. But I can also add my own custom one. So I can see my color theme right here as a hash table with a simple structure here defining directories and files, and optionally a list of well-known files or file extensions to show differently. So in this color theme, I'm saying when I see any file that's a PSD1, I want you to show it in this color. And these are just RGB values. Likewise with a PS1 or an MD file. And with the icon theme, it's very similar. I can say, if it's a directory that we're trying to list, is it a well-known directory? We'll use a list of icons here, or we'll list the icon designated by this number here. And this number here, or this label here, is available on the NerdFonts website. You can say, I can search for folder, and it'll show me all the different icons that are like a folder with their name and also their code point number. And this number here is actually what we're using to display this custom font, or this icon using the custom font we have.
If you're gonna keep showing web stuff, you're probably gonna want to zoom by about a factor of 2 or 3.
Yep,
yeah,
we can do that.
Thanks.
And we can actually look at what the and of course it doesn't actually show the icon here in GitHub, but these glyphs are what ship with the module, and there's quite a number of them that you can reference. So let's go ahead and add that color library. And then we can see we've added it, and we can set it, make it active. And now when we do an LS, we can see that we're using a different color scheme than we were before. And likewise with icons, we can look at the current loaded icon themes, add our custom icon theme, verify that it's been loaded. We'll make that the active icon theme, and then also we'll do a directory listing a little bit up to see some more folders, and we'll see that we have different folder icons and file icons. We can also do an inline pipe to format terminal icons to show you if you pass in any file info or directory info object, you'll get back a formatted string. And this string is really what's displayed here under the name label. And we can also, if we do show terminal icons, we can look at what does the currently loaded theme, what does it look like for all the files and folders that it knows about? And it will basically create some fake, meaning that these files don't actually exist on the file system, but it'll show you what files would look like if they were called MD, or if the folder was called example file, etc. Not too sexy when you're looking at this very custom theme, but if I reset back to the default theme, we can see we're back to the default, and I do show terminal icons again. we can see the whole bunch of different icons and colors for different file types and folders. And really what this does, just pretties up your console at the end of the day. So that is terminal icons in a nutshell. What was not working, which I realized a little bit ago, was adding in your custom themes that had some bugs in it, which I've hacked together and fixed just enough for the demo. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time later to clean that up, and then I'll publish a new version that will make adding custom themes actually work. But that's it. That's terminal icons. And if you have ideas for improvements, or you want to add your own custom themes to ship with the module, I'd be all ears, and hope people check it out. That's it.
Thanks so much, Brandon. All right, last up tonight, Kirk.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. So my name is Kirk Monroe. I go by the handle PowerHour. If you want to find me, just use that handle on Twitter or on Gmail or on Hotmail, and you'll be able to reach me that way. I'm a PowerShell MVP, and we're working on PowerShell for a long time, and I geek out with the language quite a bit. And this topic that I want to present today is about what I call missing commands in PowerShell, because PowerShell has this neat event handler that's been there for a long time, probably since version 1, but I'm not sure when it actually was added. And it's called the command not found action handler. So it's on your execution context under session state, invoke command not found action. You can define this event handler and do some cool things. So I'm just going to show you some examples. Let me just get this guy running here for a second. Load that into my session. All right, so I've loaded my event handler into my session. And so an example, and this is one that I hit all the time. I like this event handler because basically because I fumble at the keyboard, or because I don't like typing too much. So an example, whenever you're learning something new, a new module, new set of commands in the module, and you're looking for help, I typically, I'm not sure about you guys, but I typically do two things. I'll usually do get command dash syntax, and then I'll pick the command I'm looking for help on. So start dash process. And so I can see the syntax for the command. And I do that all the time, pulling up the syntax on commands just to get a quick overview of what's available and what parameter sets are there. And then get, of course, if I want more help, I can do get help, start dash process. And then inevitably, at some point, and that gives me the help documentation for the actual commandlet. Inevitably, I'll end up doing something along the lines of get dash help dash syntax command start dash process, and then PowerShell says, what? That's not right. And so I get tired of these errors, and just instinctively, if I want to get something about a command, my head kind of gravitates to it. I'm using get command or get help, and I'm doing stuff in a hurry, and so I trip over my own fingers. So instead, I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if I could just do get command? Well, actually, let's just go right to this command. Let's do start process again. Start dash process, and then question mark. And oh, I typed that wrong. Sorry, fumbling on the keyboard again. Well, I gotta move that little. I get this annoying window. There we go. My Hangouts window was telling me I was doing screen sharing right in front of where I was typing, so I couldn't see what I was typing. So start dash process question mark, and so that'll give me the syntax, so I can actually take a look at the parameters. Start dash process double question mark, and that'll give me the help. And the way that works, that's for any command. Pick anything under the sun. Get child item question mark. And so it's using this command not found action, which happens when I go and invoke get dash child item. PowerShell looks at that and says, well, I'm running get dash child item question mark, which could be a command name, but it's not. So PowerShell says, well, wait a minute, I don't know what that is. And so this handler gets called, and the handler looks at the command that was being invoked and says, well, you're just invoking a command with question mark, so I'm going to be smart and realize what you really want is a syntax for that command. And so it gives me the syntax by invoking internally get command dash syntax with the command name that I gave it. And that'll work for aliases as well. So I was GPS question mark. And now this limitation right here, this is just a known quirk with PowerShell. If I do get dash command dash syntax and then GPS, I get that same thing. And that's just how alias is right now. It doesn't give you back the syntax. That's logged in the PowerShell repository. We should fix that, make it better. But my point is that it doesn't matter what command you give it. It'll just automatically look at it and see if it can go and get the syntax for that command. So that's one little extension I've added that I use all the time because I get tired of invoking get command when I meant to do get help, or get help when I meant to do get command. And frankly, just typing too much. So just doing question mark is so much easier. Another thing that you can do that's kind of cool. So everybody is probably pretty familiar with this set of commands. So these object commands in PowerShell, right? Compare, for each, group, measure. A lot of these we invoke without doing -object on them. And so that's great. And when I'm doing ad hoc work, I'll do things like get process, and then I will pipe that to measure. And now, if I do, let me just hang on a second. Get command, measure. So measure is just an alias for measure object, right? So if I do GPS and I pipe that to measure, and then let's say I want to check the working set sum. So measure dash sum. Now you saw me fumble there, right? Because we're so used to typing verb dash noun that I instinctively start typing the dash even if I'm not using the noun object. And that's just my muscle memory and the way it works. And so I get tired of what I want to do, to make it actually work in PowerShell natively, is this. Set 64. And so I can run that and I can get the sum. But when I'm typing it, I'm going to type it oftentimes and get an error unless I have my little helper loaded like that. And so I decided, well, why don't I just make that work? Because my fingers want it to work that way. So I can just make it work that way. And all I'm doing is when you give it a command that it can't find, after it goes and checks for things like the question mark or double question mark at the end, it looks at the command name and says, well, is this a verb dash noun format? Yes, but you can't find it. Well, can I find just the verb as a command and as a dash, specifically as a dash object command? So measure dash object. And if so, then it tries to invoke measure dash object dash sum with whatever I give it. And that works across the board. So I could do GPS, and then I could pipe that to sort dash top. Whoops, off by 1. Sort dash top 10. Working set. You're seeing me, by the way, doing this on a Mac, which I don't work on as often as my Windows computer, hence the fumbling on the keyboard as well. But at any rate, so I could do sort dash top, but sort dash top is not a command, but sort dash object is, and dash top is a parameter, and so it just works. So this is just using some intelligence behind the scenes to figure out what it thinks you wanted to do and just doing it for you. So that's 2 examples of things you can do in here. There's also, a while ago, the PowerShell team added, so there you can do cd ... to go up 1 level. And that, if you look at that, get command cd, it's actually just a function that breaks apart the cd and the ... right? But they didn't have to do it that way. I could do remove dash item function : cd ... take that out of there. So now there's no cd ... command. And that's interesting, all the other stuff that I got from that. So I've got some kind of a bug that I'm going to put on experimenting here. But anyway, bug aside, if I do cd ... it still works because I have a handler inside of my command not found action that looks at the command cd ... and realizes, well, you meant to do it with a space, and so I'll do it with a space and just make it work. A few other things I've made work, get process, and maybe I want a specific number from this command that I'm going to invoke, so I can just do 5.10, and I can just use an array indicator right after the command name, and it just works because it seems like it's a smart thing to do, so it's just doing it. Or similarly, get process, and I want to see the names of the processes. And so again, the command gps.name does not exist, but GPS does, and I've used a dot, and so it just tries to infer what I'm doing. I'm referencing a member, and so why don't I just go and run that command, and on the results that come back, I'll then invoke the member on that collection for you automatically. So that's kind of the functionality I wanted to show. So I've got this command not found action handler. It's a simple event handler that takes a command name and some lookup args. One little quirk about the handler is that PowerShell has this thing where if you type in child item, it's going to invoke get-child item. Because if you type in a command that it doesn't find, this is native PowerShell without this handler, it will try to find it, can't find it, and then it's going to try to put get- in front of it and see if it can find it and then run it. And so that's what that just did.
About a minute.
Thanks. But so I just basically work around that because it'll pass you in get-. So if I'm looking for, let's say get-process, I used here a bunch of times, it'll give me get-process, sorry, get-process, and I just strip out the first get at the beginning. And then beyond that, it's basically a bunch of regex and a bit of AST work. So I parse the input and I find out what this missing command was, and if it took pipeline input or not based on some inspection. And then I go into, skipping ahead a little bit, there's this regex on the command text. So this is checking if it ends with a question mark or double question mark, or further on down, there's the CD one, so CD ... Or down further, I've got verb - noun. I eventually get to it. There's some stuff I didn't show in here too. But here's the one, yeah, verb - noun syntax. Then it figures out I must be trying to invoke an object property if I couldn't find it, and logic internally just to invoke the right command. And basically you just convert the text and then return back what you think you wanted it to run. And if it works, it'll just run. And that's it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kirk.
You're welcome.
So I think that brings us to the last portion. This will be our second time around doing this. But all of the speakers are going to stick around for a while. They're not obligated to, but I think all of them agreed to. And we're going to do a little bit of a brief panel sort of thing. Again, if you're watching and you have questions or you have topics that you want us to copy, go ahead and submit those either in the chat or on Discord or Slack, and we'll do our best to address it. So there's two that came up, and I'll take them in order. The first one is, what's your experience been like converting modules from 5x to 6 or 7? And have you run into like any sort of like clear lessons learned that you could synthesize for people? Or has there been any rough edges that like you broke a toe on or anything like that that you'd like to share?
I could jump in on that one. I mean, so I haven't done a lot of direct conversion of my modules because I didn't have to, which I guess speaks to answer the question a little bit. So I've got some modules that have been around for a while, like History PX. It's a binary module, and it just works. I didn't have to do a thing. Now, that's a binary module that was originally written for the .NET framework that all of a sudden just works on .NET Core and cross-platform as well, which is just amazing. I mean, like, that's fantastic. Where I have run into hurdles personally is more along the lines of going from Windows PowerShell to cross-platform PowerShell, and certain things aren't there. So another one of my modules, Format PX, does a lot of work with the format and the output commandlets, and Outprinter is in Windows, but not in Linux or Mac OS, right? Because it's not in the PowerShell core. And so I've got to do some extra work to break those parts apart and make sure it loads the right thing in the right location. Other than that, I haven't, I'm knock on wood, I haven't had much issue.
I think I've had a few issues, mostly with not so much going from 5 to 6, but going across platform, like Kirk said. And it's mostly to deal with just differences between Windows and Linux and Mac OS. And in my experience dealing with script-based modules, it's case sensitivity is a big one, especially on Linux. Even just like referencing an environment variable, case matters. Not so much on Windows, but it does on Linux. File paths, and doing any kind of join operations with file paths, you have to make sure that you're either using the correct slash that will work cross-platform, or you're using something like join path or IO path combine or something like that. And the other big one I've done, I've tripped me up before, is if you're messing with module paths, and you know how in Windows the separator is semicolon, it's a colon on Mac OS and Linux. So again, you have to use a .NET static type to or enum to get to determine the correct path separator based on your platform. So it's writing or rewriting your code to make it more generic and not have so many Windows assumptions, I think. is stuff that has tripped me up in the past.
Yeah, I've run into that a few times as well. Like a lot of the stuff for PS Koans was like originally written just because I'm accustomed to Windows, and I was like, oh, yeah, there's clearly no harm in baking in a path, surely. But there is. It's often a lot better to use things like join path and split path rather than trying to assume like, hey, this path is probably going to have backslashes or whatever, because it won't on Linux, and it still can have forward slashes on Windows, depending on where you're getting it from. So stuff like that, and like using the built-in balance, and as you said, the static environment stuff, like directory separated character is a really good one. It's under your environment class, and when you're talking about path separator, you really need that one for dealing with the path variables. Otherwise, you're gonna run into some issues for sure. But that's really all I've mainly seen. There isn't a whole lot of different stuff. Like as Kirk mentioned, some things that are Windows API specific, you obviously can't do in Linux. And some things you're like, oh, it's probably not Windows specific. Some things just kind of are, because that's how they're originally built, because Windows PowerShell was built in Windows. But there are quite a few things that do work really well across platform, no issues. But I think for the time being, your main ones are going to be, anything that really needs to interface directly with hardware, like the printer, or stuff like I think some of the sim commandlets don't really work that well. If any, I'm not really sure yet. I haven't had a good chance to test this thoroughly, but stuff like that like deals with the system itself is still kind of in the works. But anything that's really working with high-level stuff or with .NET Core stuff directly, you're basically good to go, and that's like the majority of modules, so you're pretty fine most of the time.
The only things I've run into, like you all are mentioning, like credential serialization, like that's something that Windows handles for you. But on top of that, where the two languages are starting to diverge, like invoke web request and so forth, where they're getting a lot of progress on the PowerShell 6 and 7 side, it's going to be harder to start maintaining modules that work on both sides with things like that.
Yes. So I released terminal icons a couple days ago, v0.1.0, and then people quickly complained that it didn't work on Windows PowerShell. And it's because I haven't been running Windows PowerShell day to day for a while, and I just coded it up and it works fine in PowerShell Core. What are you talking about? And that's just a small example, but then trying to make sure that you don't reference language features that are only in 6.2 or they're only in 7, especially if you're going to do an open source project. You can't utilize those when you're it's one thing if you're using it internally and you can enforce a PowerShell version, but when it's an open source project, you can't use those helpful features.
Well, you can if you want to just drop support for the old ones, but
sure. Yeah.
PowerShell 7 should be a good thing for that though, because a lot of it, like we're getting back a lot of the Windows specific stuff that we kind of like lost in 6. So I feel like in a lot of ways we'll probably end up seeing less of that, because it'll be a lot easier to move to 7 than it was to move to 6, I think. So it'll be good.
I think what will help, I haven't actually personally played with it yet, but in Script Analyzer, you can test if you're using PowerShell features that are compatible with different PowerShell versions. And I believe that's how it works anyway. I haven't played with it, like I said. But that would be helpful, especially when in a CI/CD type scenario where you can build in those checks to make sure that if I'm targeting PowerShell 4 or above, that I'm not using or say I'm targeting version 3 and above, and I don't want to introduce a feature that existed in PowerShell 4, or something like that. It's a kind of a pain in the butt to test for those things manually, and just you're just by muscle memory you're gonna introduce language features that are not compatible with maybe what you're trying to target.
Yeah, absolutely. But
I think definitely the best way is to start doing you're moving your testing and your stuff into your dev cycle and away from like the end user kind of part where it's hitting other people. Mm-hmm. That's like one of the probably best lessons I learned doing like Puppet stuff, open source work for the last year, is the earlier in my dev cycle I can see the pain, the less likely I am to like shunt that off on other people. So doing like git commit hooks for linting and that sort of thing can really help with that. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the
I've in the past used AppVeyor and stuff for CI testing, and I moved to Azure Pipelines relatively recently for PS Cons and PS Word Cloud. But yeah, like if you're able to do that, setting up your Azure pipelines in such a way that it will test on both, Windows PowerShell 5.1 and whatever the most recent version of PowerShell Core they're supporting in Azure or AppVeyor or what have you is very handy as well, because you can just have it run the test against it, and you'd be like, oh, like what happened here, what changed, what broke, can I fix this for both, etc. That's a lot easier than maintaining like 6 VMs on your own, for sure. So
yeah,
definitely. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we did that by testing on Travis and AppVeyor. So AppVeyor by default was giving you 5.x, and Travis by default, since it's a Linux, they have Windows ones now, but your Linux VMs were always going to have 6x or whatever. So you could control that matrix of versions and have all that happen in CI and never have to like actually do that local testing yourself. You could put it in there if you wanted.
Yeah, I've definitely in most of my projects now, I've switched to Azure Pipelines, and I'm running Windows PowerShell, PowerShell Core on Windows, Mac, and Linux. And frequently, I've seen tests fail only on Mac or only on Linux, and I could test for that stuff locally, so it's a lot harder. So it is really helpful to have all of those test matrices covered. Even I've also seen when I've had projects that are using Azure Pipelines, AppVeyor, and Travis, and I've seen issues on certain platforms and not others for Windows or maybe not for Windows, but definitely for Linux and Mac. I've seen things fail on one and not the other.
Like anytime you have to interact with services and it's a crapshoot for which service initializer they're going to use.
Yeah. Or trying to, I think
fun.
one of them was, maybe it was trying to, maybe it was Operation Validation Framework, I think, and maybe it's still failing. I probably should get off my butt and fix it. It couldn't enumerate a folder to look for modules. So it was getting a permission denied error. But it only did that on Azure Pipelines and not AppVeyor or not locally. So fun stuff like that.
There's always something.
It drives you crazy.
So follow-on question then. So folks here, it sounds like have been doing a lot of cross-plat stuff. What sort of things have you been making cross-plat? Are you just taking old stuff that you've already got out and you just want to make sure that it actually works cross-plat because there's no reason it shouldn't? Or are you writing new stuff and you're like, hey, this should definitely work everywhere? Or is it like, you have to use Macs or whatever for work, and so you want to make sure that it works from your normal workstation? Like, what's the deal? Why are you doing cross-plat?
Bit of both, really. PS Cons was originally written for, Windows PowerShell, and then I was like, oh, PowerShell Core is the thing, I should make it work, and that was kind of that one. And then a while after that, I started writing PS Word Cloud because people thought it was like funny or cool or whatever, and I was like, and it was just the epitome of feature creep. I started writing it on Windows with system drawing, and then I was like, this should be like cross-platform. And then I was like, great, let's move this cross-platform. Turns out system drawing is terrible on Linux and Mac, and that's just a .NET Core thing. You can't really fix it a lot of the time. It'll just throw out really random errors, and you can't do anything. So I'm like, hey, I need something that works cross-platform. Found a whole other like drawing library, C#, and plugged that in, and then eventually converted it in from PowerShell to C#, and like feature creep crazy. And then after that, I realized that after, I believe it's 6.2 preview 2, preview 1, around that point, they added a change where it changed how they load or how they auto load native libraries, things that have to be different per platform. And Ski is one of these things where it has to load a library for Windows, a library for Linux, a library for Mac, and now it's not loading those anymore. And I'm like, this is like really terrible because there's almost nothing I can do with that. Like, native library loading still has a bit of ways to go in PowerShell. It's still really tricky to do properly. I still haven't quite got it nailed down there. There are ways to do it. Basically, it involves a lot more p inverse than I think it should need, but it's still doable. So certain things that'll like get to that low level can still be really tricky. No doubt about it. But for the most part, you're not going to need that. That was just something that I was like, this would be cool. This would be cool. This would be cool. Great. Let's like code this in. It's a fun project, and then it just got really out of hand. So that ended up being a bit nuts. But beyond that, yeah, you're not going to see too much craziness. That's kind of what I end up with so far. I'm sure there'll be more.
So nobody else has any reasons. It's just.
Well, my personal machine is a Mac, so when I'm developing open source stuff, I'm on a Mac on PowerShell, so it has to be cross-platform. But it's as I develop new things, I want to make sure it's targeted to the widest group of users possible. And the typical stuff that I work on has never really been Windows specific stuff. So it's always been, regardless of what my workstation is, I'm always doing remote management type stuff. So I've typically not written like super Windows specific things.
Yeah, that's the same as me. I mean, I geek out on the language a whole lot and just on syntax and things like what I showed here today. And usually, I mean, I care more about cross-platform just because I want the language stuff I do to work no matter where you use it. It's not a driver because I have to go do this on Linux for some specific reason. It's more just because it's a language level thing, so I got to make sure it works everywhere.
Yeah, and it's the same here for me. Like, I don't have a driving need to go cross-platform with anything. I mean, I work in a Windows shop. I've got a Windows laptop. Anything Linux in our environment is stuff we're not allowed to touch anyway. So, but yeah, it's one of those things where, it's do it because it's well, often it's an interesting challenge. So it's just one of those things you dive in and figure it out and hopefully learn something from it. And hopefully somebody benefits from it at the other end, but that's that's a bonus.
I think one of the things that's been really cool to see with the PowerShell going cross-plat kind of changes is the sort of, I don't know if it's just like a comorbidity thing or if it's driving it a little bit, but watching the PowerShell community kind of level up in their testing practices and their sort of attention to design up front. I think we took a lot of stuff for granted before cross-plat, and we just kind of we didn't really think about like pathing or anything. We just relied on environment variables for a lot of stuff, and now we realize like some of that stuff is not super reliable, and so that sort of seemed to have changed how we approach things. Which
there's no
think is
temp
good
environment
overall.
variable on Linux. You know that.
Yeah, you find out fast anyway if you try.
Yeah, it breaks a lot of stuff when you rely on those things.
So one thing that came up that I kind of want to circle back to is everybody here sounds like they were working a little bit more and more around testing. And so I'm curious who writes what type of tests, whether you're writing like white box or black box unit testing, or if you've got like acceptance testing. This doesn't just have to be for PowerShell. Like I'm curious across like your whole infrastructure, right? Like what are you doing around testing?
Testing for me, I usually do a lot of Pester just because I work directly with PowerShell a lot, and it's just simpler to, kind of manage everything in the language that I'm writing with. Because a lot of my code is PowerShell, so I gotta make sure the PowerShell works. And then anything integration related, I usually write a test around it, making sure that functionality works. I do have to actually get into some XUnit for PS Words that I haven't got there yet, but I do have to get in there for it because it's literally impossible to test that. There isn't enough console output to test. The output's like a picture, unless I really want to regex some SVG or something, there's no way to test that. So that's going to be interesting. I'll see how that goes. I don't know.
Yeah, we're doing a fair amount of Pester tests at work as well, and even testing, doing infrastructure tests. So for example, deploying some stuff into Azure, we can run, and in our case, we're doing it with Terraform. We can actually do some integration tests to those Terraform modules. So deploy, a stub storage account, for example, as a super simple one, using Terraform. Deploy that out, run some Pester tests to validate that it is configured the way we think it is, tear it down. That's a very simple example of just using Pester, for not even testing code itself, but just testing it, external environment-y things.
So you're using Pester as sort of like an acceptance testing framework. You're doing
Right.
provisioning through Terraform, and then you're doing configuration through Terraform, and then your asserts are being done through. Apologize for my dog. Your asserts are being done through Pester. Are you using PoshSpec, or is it just raw Pester? And is it local or remote?
This is raw Pester, but we're using some Saki stuff that I've introduced into Saki recently for shared tasks. What was your other question about, like, doing it remotely? So this will work locally on your machine or in a CI/CD type scenario. So, but we would be in the newer version of Terraform. It's easier to, or so I should back up. Say one issue with Terraform is you can deploy something or do a Terraform plan and have it tell you what it would have deployed, and it's going to produce a nice output for you. The problem is,
Right.
until version 12, that was not a easily machine readable output. It was basically a giant binary blob. And in 12, that's going to be available as a JSON output, so we can run a Terraform plan, consume that JSON, validate that without having to deploy a whole suite of infrastructure that could take an hour to build. We can just run the Terraform plan and inspect that output. And maybe also do some other tests on an actual deployed set of resources. But once that is available in Terraform plan, that'll make testing a lot easier as well, because we don't have to stand up a bunch of infrastructure to run a 10-second test and then tear it down again.
That's pretty cool. Is anybody else doing acceptance testing or anything of that sort of nature? It's okay if the answer is no, by the way. You're not, there's no shame.
For me,
Yeah, not really myself, but yeah.
Yeah, so myself, it's with PRs and PowerShell and running acceptance tests for the work that I do on PowerShell core.
Cool.
That's true, yeah. That happens quite a lot there, yeah.
We do a lot of acceptance testing, but we do it in specific lower regions that are very similar to our upper environments. We don't have specific Pester tests written. We just kind of, build an environment, do our testing, make sure that the script works and doesn't destroy things, then tear it down.
That's definitely a good step for those acceptance tests. Will this nuke stuff? No? Cool. Does anybody else have any topics they wanted to cover? Any questions they had for anybody else on the panel?
Not for me at the moment.
I think I'm good.
Okay, well, we're a little bit over on the original time, so if everybody wants to disperse and go back to doing the things that they're doing, I think that's probably mostly okay. Warren, do we have any announcements we want to drop towards the end? Glenn asks, how did we all get so awesome? Which is very sweet. Actually, no. One thing I should highlight, I'll drop a link, is the stickers stuff that Adil has had.
Adil has been awesome with that.
Let me see. My Google foo will work here.
If not, I have a link ready.
Yeah, PS Design. I was trying to remember the name of the thing.
There you go.
So, drop that. And I almost dropped it into a completely unrelated Discord for tabletop gaming. That would have been really weird.
Love it.
Too many things open. So yeah, for those of you who don't know, Adil has gone together and gotten a bunch of kind of, I guess, open development, open use stickers and images and that sort of thing together for the PowerShell community. There's a bunch of really cool stuff in here by a bunch of different people, memes and a bunch of great stuff. I'm a big fan. You should definitely check it out. There's a bunch of options in there. And the sticker trading in the community is really starting to take off, which is phenomenal. I just got some from Bill earlier this week that you may have seen on Twitter.
Nice.
I got this one now. I'm excited to throw it on my laptop. I haven't undocked my laptop for a while, so I haven't put it on yet. But
are you old enough to remember Pogs and the craze with that?
I am not.
This feels a little bit about like collecting pogs and trading pogs.
Just don't break them. Please tell me somebody got the picture that was going around on the Slack channel from Summit of Jeffrey Snowbird Drake.
Yeah, that one's pretty good.
That one's a good one.
Okay, well, I think we're going to go ahead and start the wrap up here. Thank you, absolutely everybody, all the speakers tonight. Thank you to the viewers for everybody coming together and doing this. This is definitely a community show that we really, truly could not do without everybody involved. So seriously appreciate all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
All right, see ya.
Have a good night.
Night.